When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you choose, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been so much access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. Today, I've got a great episode for you with a practitioner that is doing their work, and what a great story it is. Jahan holds a PhD and completed his dissertation on psychedelics in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He has an amazing book called The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness and Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach, which was published in 2022 and can be found on all platforms and formats. He earned his master's in consciousness and transformative studies from John F. Kennedy University and his bachelor's from the University of Arizona with a major in philosophy and minors in physics, psychology, and mathematics. Aside from his academic work, he's undergone several major trainings, including graduating from the 2-year Hakomi somatic psychotherapy program and training within the Mazatec mushroom tradition. He assisted the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy certificate training at CIIS for 2 years and mentored at the Center for Consciousness Medicine. He's a content advisor for the Synthesis Psychedelic Guide training and works as the facilitator for legal psilocybin mushroom ceremonies in Jamaica with Atman retreats. You know, this conversation is just a celebration of all things psilocybin mushrooms, which I'm really excited about because, number one, it's the medicine that I've worked with the most and feel like I have the strongest connection with. Also, just looking at some of the most popular episodes of the show, you in the audience really are curious about psilocybin mushrooms as well. So it was just a delight to sit down and talk with someone that knows a lot more about it than I do. And so the conversation goes through some of Jahan's experiences. We go into everything from transpersonal experiences that can happen within the medicine space and like what people, like how to work with that, where these experiences get misunderstood, what mushrooms are, like some different theories about, are they a technology? Did they help humanity evolve from, monkeys into higher intelligence beings? Are they put here from aliens? Just all kinds of cool ideas there. How they actually heal and help us. The whole idea of moving towards wholeness, that we're not healing something as much as we're coming back into connection with our true nature, which is wholeness and, oneness with source. And then we sort of go in this really interesting direction about building a relationship with mushrooms, which is something that happens with practitioners of a particular medicine. Like, for instance, my partner has a really strong relationship with ayahuasca, and some of the folks that I've talked to that work closely with mushrooms, it's no different. There's a relationship that develops, and so we get into like what that actually means and what that looks like, and that leads us into talking about preparation and integration, as well as what do we do with these experiences when we come out of like a ceremony or a journey and really feel called to work with medicine. How do we do that? How do we do that safely and in a responsible way, that's so that we can help other people? and then different types of settings and containers and lineages. That's one thing that I've always been curious about mushrooms, is that because they're so accessible, it seems like there's less of an emphasis on ceremony with mushrooms as opposed to, say, ayahuasca or San Pedro. But why is that? And, I was really curious to ask what Jahan thought. So if you are curious about mushrooms, this is going to be a treat for you. And if you are already a fan, I'm sure you're going to hear some amazing stuff that is going to just deepen your appreciation and inspire you for your next journey. And, it's important to mention that, Jahan is able to work with mushrooms in places like Jamaica where the medicine is legal. And it's important to acknowledge that this medicine is not yet fully legal in a lot of places, and that there are a lot of people that are interested in working in expanded states of consciousness for healing, for self-development and discovery, for connecting with purpose. And maybe the mushroom isn't as accessible to you based on the legal status where you are. And I'd like to humbly suggest, if you are one of those people that are curious about expanding your work with altered states of consciousness, that giving breath work a try can be a really wonderful bridge and entry point into the world of these holotropic states. Holotropic meaning moving towards wholeness, right? Just as a plant placed near a window will turn towards the light to get the most light. Our inner consciousness is like this as well. And while mushrooms can be such a wonderful, powerful way of connecting with this consciousness, it's not the only way. And breathwork is a wonderfully accessible, legal, and powerful way of accessing similar states that we can connect with through working with medicines like mushrooms. So if you're interested in that, please send me an email or go to the link in the show page to check out the different breathwork offerings I have. If you're in Tucson, we can connect in person. I also work with people online, both one-on-one and in groups. So I would love to have you drop in and experience these expanded states for yourself. So without further ado, enjoy this wonderful conversation with Jahan Khamsehzadeh. Welcome to the Vital Point podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, it's an honor for me as well. I was so excited to run into you at the MAPS conference recently in Denver. It was such a cool experience. What was your conference experience like?
I mean, I think collectively it was definitely a milestone event for the movement, and it's personal significance for everybody that's been there into this for a long time. And my experience was a lot of connection. I know a lot of people in the field, and then there's a lot of people I've worked with remotely but hadn't met with in person. And then there's a lot of people that read the book or saw a podcast. So every 2 or 3 minutes for a few days, somebody was coming up and running in. And I've never had that level of frequency, of that level of different connections, I think, in one field before. And it felt we've come such a long way in culture to see a lot of the talks that were there. For example, Aaron Rodgers, who won MVP twice in the NFL and credits it to his use of ayahuasca. And then you see Mr. Perry, who's the governor of Texas, coming up. Right. And share, his endorsement for psychedelic research. And so it's gone far more integrated into the cultural mainstream than ever before. And that was always, the hope. Even myself, like looking at this for 20 years, that's always the hope. But it's very different when it starts to crystallize and become embodied. So it was very beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful and sometimes overwhelming. I came away with the feeling that it was almost like a psychedelic experience in and of itself. I was joking with a friend as we were leaving. I was like, we're going to need an integration circle to process the conference,
Yeah. It was tapped out. I think I went with five good friends, and we were exhausted by that day 5 or 6. And it's full on for 12 to 17 hours a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It
yeah.
was really
Yeah.
nice to be able to get out of that vendor area, which is where I was one of the people running up to you. You know, it's like, oh, hey, there's Jahan. I got to go talk to him. But yeah, it's like there's so much energy and like sort of overstimulation in that area. And then to be able to get into different parts of the convention center, like, especially like getting down into that area where they had some like chill out rooms and meditation rooms. And I think there was even like a
Mm-hmm.
room where you could pet therapy dogs in that
Oh,
area.
wow.
It was so nice because it just got quieter and quieter. And it reminded me of being in a big library. You know, by the time you got
Mm.
down into that sort of chill out area, it was like, the energy here is so much more like calmer, you know, as opposed to
Mm.
that vendor area.
I definitely feel the population that's really in psychedelics is very creative, either by its nature and temperament or because it's use. And so there was just so many different kinds of opportunities of experiences there for people that wanted to have art, amazing large art gallery.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot of live music playing. I saw 11 talks the first day, so you have like 10 talks going on at the same time.
Right.
You have different chill spaces, you have huge exhibition hall. So there's like a lot of novelty, given whatever kind of experience you wanted to have at that moment, there's a place to go have that.
Yeah. It's like a choose your own adventure type
Yeah,
experience.
for sure.
Yeah. And I liked how that they really sort of played that up too. Like if you were looking at the app that Maps provided, there were these different tracks. So it's like you could follow the medical track or the, sort of indigenous medicine track or the, venture capital sort of track, and all different shades of variation in between that. So it was a really, really interesting experience. Definitely a watershed moment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that overstimulation and just uh, excess of novelty, as you would say, I think
Mm-hmm.
would maybe lead into a good sort of place to begin talking about how psilocybin has affected your life, because you share in your
Mm-hmm.
book about this first experience that you had at a tool show. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was wondering if you could maybe recount that a little bit, or if there was something that just felt alive to share about that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, totally. In terms of, the sense of novelty, it's definitely helped me with ADHD.
Mm,
It's hard to concentrate in class before, but after that experience at 18, I became hyper focused
mm,
in college and school and was able to do like at least another 18 years of academia after that. That very particular experience has still been the most meaningful to my life. Rarely a day goes by after about 20 years I haven't thought about it. And the reason it was so impactful is I was an atheist at the time,
mm,
coming out of a kind of a suicidal and depressed state. Very much an existential inquiry, like what's it all mean? What's time and space? What happens when we die? What's the point of it all? And I had been walking for about 6 hours a day for 7 months because I was kind of in this deep, like, why do I want to be alive and what do I want to do with my life? And it felt like it kind of accumulated in this experience of taking psilocybin mushrooms on the Wade C Tool, my favorite band at the time. And I thought it was going to be like the best day of the year. And it was the most significant day so far. And during the experience, I started having, at least in my mind, this experience of I'm about to die,
uh-huh.
and it starts to seem very real when you're into it.
Right.
And I stayed at this threshold for like 15 minutes. And then just out of deep curiosity, because I'd been thinking about death for so long, I kind of relaxed and let go and crossed the threshold, and there's an explosion of my consciousness. It felt like under my normal awareness was the sensation that we are eternal, and it was knowing. And it felt like every cell was orgasming, and that we were always existing before the Big Bang, after death. And then a voice arose, and this is Jahan, and there's this recognition, again, that was God, something I thought was impossible. And I said, is this real? And it said, yes. And I just broke down crying, like the deepest sobs. So I was looking up the ceilings with like waterfall coming down my eyes for like an hour and a half. And it said, what do you want? As if you were the genie. I was like, what do I want? Nobody's really asked me that before. And I asked, well, what are we? As in us as humans. And then I saw light come out of the ground and fill every body. and saw that we are light, and light and love are the same thing pretty much in this realm, and that these bodies are space-time shifts to explore space and time, and they're like bio vessels. It said love is the most important thing in the universe by far. Miles after that is learning, and everything else is so insignificant compared to these values that if you keep these in order, you'll never have to worry about the complexity of anything else. And so it really became like my guiding system. And after this deep experience of interconnection and that spirituality and consciousness pervades everything, there's years of like constant states of synchronicity. The hard part, yourself being in Tucson, this is 2002, and there wasn't much of a culture for this, in terms of deep spiritual experiences with psychedelics. I met one person that whole time there that had something like that. Maybe there are others, but in all my years of searching, so much of it felt very alone. So I found my kind of affirmations and points of references through books and music. It wasn't until I came to the Bay Area to study this more academically more and more. But I got to have that firsthand experience of how drastically a life could change overnight, in my case, with these psychedelics.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Listening and also reading it in the book, like, I felt a lot of resonance and a lot that I could relate to. I've also had a few experiences like that are just so far off the scale of, even what I would consider like transcendental psychedelic experiences or transpersonal experiences that, it just leaves me in a sense of wonder and awe. And so you mentioned like, this is a daily sort of meditation or a daily reflection, kind of integrating that. How has that looked, and like what did that look like in the beginning, especially, because for me, when there's been these moments that have been so mind-blowing, and then it's almost like, well, what do I do with this? It feels so overwhelming to try to think about integrating it.
Yeah, totally. So to be transparent, I've had hundreds of journeys since, and that one is by far still the most important and impactful.
Yeah.
Maybe because I don't need something like that again. I needed it at the time, maybe to keep my life, still here. And I knew when it was ending that I was completely changed, and it felt like might have been the most significant day of my life. I went up to the arena and just looked. I'm like, wow, that just happened.
Yeah.
The same way like a traumatic event can change your life, and you're like, nothing will ever be the same. You can go for positive experiences. I thought about it a lot for the first 7 years, and I made a mistake. I told somebody the next day, just, hey, this happened. And his response was like, what, you think you're special? And so it became very clear by day one, right afterwards, that people aren't going to have a point of reference for this.
Right.
Right. And Ken Wilber has what he calls, the great philosopher, I love him, like the pre-trans fallacy. If you describe anything beyond somebody else's development or paradigm, they'll probably reduce it to a lower state of development. So people reduce transpersonal experiences to infantile magical thinking because they don't know how to make sense of it. They don't have a point of reference. And so I'm like, well, there's an unlikelihood people are going to understand what I went through. They're probably going to think I'm crazy. So I didn't talk about it much until I moved to the Bay. Met like a lot of psychedelic tribe. But so that kept me really nurturing the experience internally. And then it's just like, as I mentioned, the ripples still come into my life fairly frequently this far. And one reason it was very important is this: I heard somebody say there's only one time that the veil really drops, where you think reality is one way. I was very much in the science, a very materialistic, reductive paradigm. I thought religion and spirituality was made up nonsense. I was in that same camp. And so seeing that consciousness pervades everything, that we're all part of one large mind, that God's inside of everything, that happens once. And so it was the most healing experience of my life because it completely stripped away my view of reality, and showed that there's a deeper one and in one moment. So all the experiences that then have been just deepening into that reality in many ways.
Yeah. I'm grateful to hear that, eventually, um, you found the community where you could share that and explore it and be accepted, because like you mentioned, there are people that share their own experiences and then get pathologized or judged, or just it gets taken into a sort of negative context. And um I remember even like on this show, there's a friend of mine who's a transpersonal psychologist, and she said, hey, why don't you share some of your experiences and we can do it together, rather than just talking about what transpersonal psychology is. And um, these were like really intimate moments, and I didn't consider that, sitting here in front of my computer in my house, like, yes, I'm going to put it on a podcast and anybody's going to be able to listen to it. But I thought, oh, I feel pretty safe here. It's not going to be a big deal. And then when it came time to actually share it, like, wow, it was a big deal. And so some of those moments I've been able to share, like in supportive integration groups, or with very, very close trusted friends, or and I'm grateful to have a therapist that's very like pro psychedelic that I can talk about things with. But that power of community to really explore and share the work that we're doing and the experiences that we have is truly priceless.
No, totally. Thanks. Well done. And I'm glad you've come out of the psychedelic closet more personal in sharing and just to like resonance with the intimacy of what that is. I mean, I started off my book sharing this experience, which is by far my most intimate, vulnerable moment.
Right.
It's like it's the one that's most personally meaningful. And I was like, am I really going to start off my book with this? And the outcome has been, I've been on about 70 podcasts over this last year, and every single one of them asked about it. And the book is deeply researched, goes with a lot of theory, but what stays with people is that personal experience.
Yeah.
And part of it is the solidity, because I've had integrated for so long where it's become so real internally that I'm not going to really be affected by what somebody else says, So it's just like that part that first needed to be nurtured and taken care of for a long time eventually becomes solid.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about that first person that you shared with a day afterwards, and like, instead of being validated and acknowledged and at least just listened to, you had this judgment and this kind of like criticism. And I'm grateful that, it sounds like you're able to hold that with like love and compassion, and now at least. But I could imagine that would be kind of a disintegrating type of experience, maybe not for you personally, but for for some people that might be sharing that really intimate and vulnerable part of themselves. So I'm grateful that it's become such a beautiful core part of like who you are and what you're able to share and connect with so many people through.
I love it. It's something I'd found with that experience, and there's a very small amount of people until later on, including older people and teachers. And but one response, and including his, was actually jealousy. And that's hard to be with, because I'm like, well, then I don't get to be honest here and come into deep connection. But I'm like, what I'm trying to tell you is that this is possible and it exists. Right. And what we've seen with psychedelics is 65% of people in the right setting have a classical mystical experience. And there's an infinite variety of mystical experiences, but I'm like, that's a high number, So if you structure this correctly, do your due diligence, it's a high probability for you to.
So, I know you talk in your book about, kind of the stoned ape theory and how mushrooms may have played a part in human evolution and sort of pushing our consciousness forward. Do you have a particular theory of like what mushrooms are and like what their purpose is personally?
For sure. It's definitely one I've been working on for a while. First, let me put forward Terrence's theory. And he shares in his first psilocybin mushroom growers guide, him and his brother Dennis were the first to publish a mushroom growers guide so people could start to do it on its own. And he said he got this transmission from the mushroom. He's like, I know this will make me seem crazy. I'm taking a risk here, but this is what the mushroom literally said, because a lot of people can hear a voice on it. And it said, it comes from space. And it's this like intergalactic entity that kind of networks minds, but then it networks civilizations together. Because we're kind of very much entangled, even when it comes to like quantum mechanics. And it said, once we're ready and we're there as a species, it'll tell us how to build spaceships, but we're not quite there yet to have the power to hold that level of technology. So I'm putting that out there as a very far example, and that Terrence was like, okay, this is crazy, but this is what I was told. But if we kind of reduce it just to evolution on this life, right, which is, I think, just a good framework to work with. Mushrooms, fungi has been here for about 2.5 billion years. And they keep finding evidence it might be earlier, right? Animals have been here for 500 million. So fungi has been here 5 times longer than animals. Fungi set the soil for plants to develop. Fungi were the first root systems of plants, this mycelial network. And so the body of fungi is known as mycelium, this large underground living network that sends electrical impulses through all the plants in the environment, decomposes biological matter to turn into nutrients and food. And so our entire evolutionary history, especially since being on land, and all biological life on land, has been growing on top of this living network that's very much been co-evolving with us. And out of this living network pops up the fungi, the actual mushrooms that are mushrooms are about 70 million years old, including psilocybin, the cap and stem formation, easy to spot and grab, especially for primates. And in some of these, over 200 different species around the world have psilocybin that fits into the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor in our brain better than serotonin itself, creating a hyper-connected brain state and stimulating neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, right? We know now that it creates it's 80% effective for treatment-resistant depression, anxiety. 65% of people have mystical experience. 80% effective for alcoholism and nicotine. So reduces addictions, takes away depression, so increases self-esteem, right? So this would have been very valuable for our tribal ancestors, but also primates. And so the idea is, as they ate these mushrooms, which Paul Stamets, my great mycologist, notes is the most common mushroom found in the African savannas we evolved, even as they ate it with microdose amounts, it would have heightened their sense of, early studies of the psilocybin mushrooms with Roland Fisher found that a small dose of psilocybin increases visual acuity, depth perception. So they would have been more visually acute to seeing predators, finding food, a higher doses stimulating sexual arousal, and even higher dosing to having mystical experience. So you have the emergence of religion, deep empathy, group bonding, and creativity. So it fits in all the pieces I've come across of how human beings evolved. It gives a very grounded, logical explanation that consciousness expansion happened because consciousness expanding compounds in the environment, just our food. And in 20 years of looking at this, I haven't found a single retort. This was my dissertation, I had to defend it. And I've only seen increases in evidence as we continue our scientific studies.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery there, and yet there's a lot of, definitely a lot of clues, I think, pointing towards that. I definitely have also had some curiosity about, mushrooms being some sort of technology, or some sort of alien kind of consciousness that, maybe is beyond our current grasp of science. And it's such a fascinating topic to kind of explore, and I'm glad that you go into it in the book.
Thanks. It's so far in this life, I'm 39 years old, I haven't found a more important idea, and that's a very big statement. I got my doctorate in philosophy, cosmology, consciousness, and all the other degrees. I've been looking at ideas in many ways in the development of paradigms, and it's the most important one. It explains our origins, which has been a deep mystery for definitely Western history. No, for all of them, it's psychedelics have been outside of our paradigm. They're like anomalies to the reductive current scientific paradigm. But it kind of, aside from finishing the picture of how we got here, it's our portal back into deep interconnection. Yeah. Another really important idea I came across was by Professor Richard Doyle in his book Darwin's Pharmacy: Sex, Plants, and Evolution in the Noosphere. And for his research of that book, he read thousands of psychedelic trip reports. And he says that the signature psychedelic insight is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnected living system. And this should be termed ecodelics. So we have to sit here and what's the incentive for plants and fungi to grow these molecules? one, they increase ecological awareness, right? That we're systems within larger systems. And so this is one way for it to keep balance with organisms in the environment. If the organisms are in balance, the environment can theoretically live forever, right? So there's a lot of incentive for fungi to grow these molecules. So, because we're all in symbiotic relationship, if we don't destroy the environment, it could potentially live for maybe for all of eternity if it can find a way to get itself off this planet.
Yeah. It makes me think of Kalindi Eiley, talking about, he was talking about like, I got nothing against ayahuasca, and there's beautiful things within ayahuasca, but the relationship of ayahuasca is only as old as fire and having a pot to cook it in, as opposed to the mushroom, being here for countless, thousands of years, millennia before that. And so the relationship, the interconnected relationship of the mushroom to the planet, as well as to the plants and us and animals, like you said.
What's amazing is, it's one of the many reasons I focused on it was that it grows all over the planet, unlike a lot of the other psychedelics. I don't know any that it's that widespread in every continent but Antarctica. So it would have been possible to find along the way for most of human migration. We look at archaeological evidence, starting with cave paintings. We see, prehistoric psychedelic use all across the world. Right. Cave paintings, mushroom use all over Northern Europe, all across Africa, Asia. And then you come to the Americas, people came here 20,000 years ago. We're just full of it. And the Mayans left about 200 different little mushroom stones. The Aztecs were seen eating mushrooms in political ceremonies, and including up in North America also. So it's definitely, prehistorically, is probably the most widely used psychedelic. And coming to even today, it's because of its easy access and ability to grow. It's, I think, the deepest psychological medicine that's available to us for our species.
Yeah. When I had the first time we had Acacia Lewis on the podcast, she talked about Quetzalcoatl and the journey of the deified heart, which was an amazing journey to go on and to get that perspective of just how deep the lineage is and the work with mushrooms goes,
Yeah, that's her specialty. We had T not so long ago, and she's really good at following lineages and has a deep understanding of the relationship between humans and plants.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of times the mystical experience as a sort of main feature of the psychedelic experience. Why do you think that is? Because sometimes we are approaching these experiences like hoping to have some sort of mystical experience, but sometimes, like for instance, in the experience you shared, the mystical experience like kind of comes out of nowhere, whether it's your intention or you're looking for it or not.
Absolutely. This seemed to be like a quality of grace, that things kind of happen on its own, especially if all the pieces are fit. And I think with anything, like the more you practice something, grace is more possible, but it's not necessarily up to us. And, something that comes up for me right now is like, I take psychedelics hoping not to have a mystical experience, just because it's a lot. It's a lot, like there's generally a lot, often like this threshold of fear you have to move through, like this ego death. It's fairly uncomfortable. I've had many of those crossovers, but oh my God, it's a heavy experience. And also I feel like I've gotten enough of those experiences that I'm not seeking it. It's healing because it shows us our nature, which I think is something we're all hungering. Even so much of most people I work with doing the psychedelic work legally in Jamaica come in for depression. And depression I can see is a source of a disconnected self, of low self-esteem, of an identity of I don't like myself. And that comes out of this illusion that we're separate, and that we're not enough. And once you realize you're connected to everything and that you are love, I've seen decades of depression go away for people overnight. The hard part of my job is that doesn't always happen. It's 80% effective for people, and half the people just break through the first time. It's not a guarantee, So it's the difficulty when people, then it leads them deeper into depression. I'm like, I tried this thing, it didn't work for me. There's something really wrong with me. But the most healing experiences I have found are those of oneness, which I would put as the main characteristic of a mystical experience. of our deep sense of interconnection. And there's infinite ways to experience oneness, right? It could be oneness with the environment, with yourself, with a partner, with the planet, with the physical universe, with God. It's like we're talking about unity with everything, and there's so many ways that can manifest.
I'm curious what your thought is on this, because you just mentioned the depression, and that sometimes the depression can be challenging to move through. And you also mentioned sort of the challenge of the ego death experience and the surrender and the willingness to move through that's sort of inherent in that experience, right? And at least from sort of like the polyvagal theory, the depression is sort of a frozen state, a shut down state. And so as we move out of that frozen state, we have to move back into this activated fight or flight state, which for a lot of people, right, it's safer to be in that shut down frozen state rather than kind of move through the discomfort of whatever sympathetic activation is there. So I wonder if there's a correlation within that, right? Of like that surrender of the psychedelic experience is helping us into that surrender of like being able to move from that stuck, depressed state back into regulation, which has to happen through that activated, sympathetic arousal.
Totally. No, thank you. Definitely. Something like polyvagal theory gives a great physiological explanation of what's happening.
Yeah.
A little bit more emotional, because it's very much in resonance with this. This is one I heard from Stanislav Grof, the great psychedelic researcher. I was honored to be able to take a couple courses with him, and he shared that depression is internalized anger. That anger that was supposed to go outwards, but then it went to oneself and kind of broke oneself down and shut yourself down. And so often, as you said, is when polyvagal theory, you move from a frozen state to being then aroused. It's the same thing. It's like one of the stages generally of moving through out of depression is getting angry.
Yeah.
Feeling the anger, which energizes you and fires you to do things now. Depression, you couldn't move. Now you're like, and it's found that anger is being directed to the right place or being cathartically released. And he said psychedelics catalyze what he calls holotropic states of consciousness, states that organically move towards wholeness. And so during these states, it's our system physiologically and psychologically are being reorganized to come into greater wholeness. So anything that was repressed comes up to be integrated most of the time by itself.
Yeah. And according to his work, we all possess that inner healing intelligence that helps us move towards that wholeness when we give ourselves the opportunity and can open and surrender into it. So, something like the mushroom is helping us along with that, right?
Totally. I think him and following Ken Wilber's work, it's like all of evolution's a movement towards more wholeness. Like atoms are little holes that come into greater wholeness, create molecules are little holes to create cells. There's like 39 trillion in our body. And so our job is also for deeper wholeness, where there's romantic community planets, so it's more holes coming together and feeling a part of a larger whole. It's more unity. It's like the main drive of evolution. But even when it comes to our body, it's trying to maintain its wholeness. If I cut my arm, it'll move back into wholeness and heal itself. I don't sit there and focus on it. There's this self-organizing quality in our body and our psyche. And sometimes it needs some help. If I take certain nutrients, if I have some deficits, it's not going to heal us well. And if I take certain things, it might heal faster. Same with our psychology, especially if there's some traumas that were super intense. It needs some help to dissolve those. And I think that the chemical catalysts, those with like psychedelics and psilocybin, are by far the most effective I've seen.
I'm curious as far as, people that are interested. I think, as I was reading the book, kind of came across this, building a relationship with psilocybin. What does that mean to you?
I think almost everything in life comes down to relationships. Really influenced by the work of Alfred North Whitehead, because it's known as process relational philosophy or philosophy of organism. That based on interconnection, everything is in relationship with one another. And even in our own life, I think the most significant thing is personal relationships, including the relationship to ourselves. Depression is a bad relationship, a faulty relationship with self. It's like you're in a domestic partnership with somebody you don't like all the time. You're depressed, right? If you like this person, you're inherently happy and happy to be here. And so that extends to nature. In indigenous societies, many of them see these psychedelic plants and fungi as teachers, as master teachers. And so you come in to learn from them. And it's a lifelong relationship, very different from our Western kind of reductive model, which is more atomistic and just looks at the parts. It's just like, instead you're looking at like this large net that connects everything. And so, a lot of people, because they come from the Western paradigm, are like, why would you keep taking psychedelics if it worked and you already healed? And it's like, well, you can keep healing. Healing never ends. Learning never ends. And so for myself, and I think for a lot of people when they get into this, it's like, I'm in a relationship with mushrooms, whether I'm taking them or not. They've become a part of my life. And so there's a sensation in my body around them as I feel those experiences. There's intuitions around them. It's just like they are, they become the same way people go to church and have a communion. You don't just stop because you took it once. It's the same way of like taking a sacrament to connect deeper with nature.
Yeah. I always felt that there was some relationship there, even though I couldn't explain it in words. And then there was one particular experience that I had on Mount Lemmon, where I had sort of that moment that you were describing, where I was like, I really thought I was going to die. And I kind of just said, well, here we are, like, there's nothing I can do about it. And, when I came out of that particular part of the experience, it was like everything had changed and everything was I felt very connected to the environment. And it was the first time that I felt like the mushrooms started to have a conversation, like an actual conversation with sort of words rather than these feelings. And one of the things that they started to talk about was like, hey, do you realize how we've been kind of helping you along through the years, even though you haven't really been aware of it? And, they like kind of took me back to these sort of signpost crossroads moments in my life. And there were a couple of them that like I hadn't even put it together until that moment, but had happened while I was in a psilocybin journey. Friends of mine that I had met because of psilocybin and because of these sort of crossroads, moments. And it was like, whoa, okay, this is really cool. And then, that was where I started to try to develop that relationship. Now that it was like, oh, okay, now that there is something here that I'm aware of, growing my own medicine, like I felt helped me really take that to a different level, because it felt like the relationship really, really deepened, especially when it was still growing, like even before there was like fruiting bodies, to kind of see. I could feel the energy and the potentiality there. And I had completely underestimated the potency of that. There were a couple of journeys during that time in the vicinity of this growing medicine that were like so intense. And when I sat down and was like, got curious of like, well, what's happening here? It was like, oh yeah, there's all this medicine in the space, that was the only thing that I could come up with as like a reasonable explanation. So yeah, thank you for sharing your perspective on that.
Yeah, likewise. I definitely recommend people grow and take a few hours to figure out, but worth it mostly just to deepen that experience with them. And as far as, them helping you always subtly, I've made a lot of my major life decisions based on psychedelic experiences, and I'm grateful for them. I'm not saying that everything you experience you should do or that's right, but it's helped me leave certain majors, jobs, relationships, and move in certain directions that I'm ultimately super grateful for. And very much where it said, we've been helping you all along. I had this other experience, very a good amount, both LSD and psilocybin on this very particular day. And it showed me that it's been helping animals out all along. You know, and I got to see deers eating mushrooms and moving in different, making decisions on migration.
Wow.
You know, so good work by Ronald K. Siegel. He's a psychopharmacologist at UCLA for 20 years, and he wrote this book, Intoxication, The Fourth Drive of Evolution. And in 20 years of studying psychoactive substances, he said 94% of animals alter their consciousness chemically. It's so rampant, he calls it the fourth drive of evolution after the drive for water, sex, and food. And so we have to enlarge our scope to see just beyond humans. We're really self-involved, which is fine. I think animals are too, right? But when we look at this process of nature in psychedelic substances or any kind of chemical substance that we found in plants, it's super rampant. And we're used to normally looking at domesticated animals outside the normal environment. But in nature, given the opportunity, most animals will alter their consciousness. And so it's helped me really enlarge the scope of this relationship of psilocybin mushrooms has on the planet with all animals. You know, we're not sitting there looking at them, but there's another book by Giorgio Saramani called Animals and Psychedelics. You know, it's ethnobotanist in Italy, just breaks down all these different animals that eat psychedelic substances. So for me, it's really helped me again feel more deeply connected with all of life, seeing that this is a process we've always all been engaging in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting to think about. And yeah, probably something worth studying more, right?
Yeah. Right. We're just at the beginning. You know, it's huge. We've come really far, but the potential use and understanding of psychedelics seems, I mean, it's just infinite. When you move into some of these states like DMT, you're entering this vast, large realm. And there's been recent studies that took place at the Imperial College of London on DMT and entities. You know, it's just fairly often. And so we just recently, a few weeks ago, had a panel come forward of the people's experiences. It's just like, how do people keep taking these substances? A lot of them see the same entities, right? And I have over and over, there's cross-cultural ones, like serpents is ones I've always seen. And so given that you can file a scientific method and keep reducing these things with different people and get very similar results, there seems to be some level of ontological reality to these entities and to these realms, which completely shifts our whole idea of what reality is and how it's possible. You know, I mean, we're just scratching the surface, as strange as it sounds, of other dimensions, you know, and as strange as that sounds, it's, again, we can follow a scientific method, keep seeing similar patterns and results.
Right. Yeah. That research that you're talking about is super interesting to me. I also kind of will laugh at it a little bit, you know, especially when they're talking about the people that are staying in the DMT state for like hours. They're able to prolong it, and I'm like, this is either like the best thing ever or the beginning of like a horror sci-fi movie that I've seen. You know, so but it's curious either way. It's really, really interesting. And you know, it's also interesting because like when I talked with Acacia and also you know, someone that she works with often, Dave Hodges, that are working with these super high dose, you know, levels of psilocybin, what came across to me was that these are explorers, you know, these are explorers on a final frontier, you know, that are, you know, possibly breaking through to, you know, different planes of existence or dimensions that we don't normally have access to, even maybe on like something, you know, what would be considered like a heroic dose or a high dose, that there's different levels, you know, and that was my takeaway though, was like they're pioneers on a final frontier here.
Totally, no, and it's definitely not everybody's call to be an explorer. Some people, you know, want to explore the planet. Some people want to be astronauts. It's not for everybody, but definitely those people that want to should definitely be able to. You know, on that note, with the entities and the explorers, something that kind of always stood out to me, I thought it was like a good rationalization from Terence McKenna. He's like, well, if an alien species wanted to talk to us, you know, the best way to do it would be through a plant psychedelic substance, because you'd come out and nobody would believe you. Like they have
Right.
these huge experiences that are life changing because they would have to move very subtly to not disturb the culture.
Mm.
I mean, we're in a lot of fear. We're scared of other races on this planet. Should aliens come down, 70% of our planet probably won't go to war. We'd move to fear.
Right.
Just even, you shared like DMT could be amazing, or there's fear responses,
Mm-hmm.
right? People have that with AI, with everything.
Right.
And so for us to begin merging with deeper intelligence, it have to happen slowly through our species, individually, one by one, here and there, and in a way to not alarm culture.
There's like that famous Bill Murray story, right? Where it's like no one will ever believe you. like he shows up at like a random house party or something and parties with them, and then at the end he's like, no one's ever gonna believe this.
I love that.
Yeah. So what about people, like what advice would you give to somebody that is wanting to like approach this work? Because I think one of the things I'm curious about is it seems like a lot of people that, especially that are new to the psychedelic experience, when they have like maybe their first major peak experience, kind of the takeaway is like, I want to be involved, or I want to be like serving medicine, or I want to like sort of becomes their life, or they want it to become their life. And so I'm like, from my perspective, that's curious, because I feel like, well, you're really asking for a lot there, instead of, like maybe what you're thinking of at that moment. But I'm curious for somebody like you that, has been doing this work for a long time. Like why do you think that pull is there? And then like, what advice would you give to those people?
I mean, I've seen a lot of clients I work with,
Right.
a few journeys in, like, I want to do this.
Right.
I think we have this deep need to first have a meaningful life and ultimately being of service. Abraham Maslow and his amazing hierarchy of needs, it's represented as a pyramid, but that's not how he put it out there. It's dream, we have a drive for security, belonging, connection, self-esteem. While going through this, we feel a sense of deficiency. Then we have self-actualization. I know who and what I am. So there's a sense of relaxation and freedom. And for the last 10 years, he worked on this level called transcendence, that once those are met, the biggest meaning comes from being of service. So it's a deep part of our soul. Like, if we really are one, we want to help the all, And so as a lot of their stuff clears and they're finally feeling love and free for whatever period of time, the impulse is to help, like to embody love. And given that this was the most effective thing for them, they want to share that with people, right? So it's a very natural step in the process that I see happen on. That being said, my recommendation is that, well, then take it seriously, take it seriously. So if you haven't even taken a psychedelic, read 2 or 3 books on it. Just take it seriously. Do your research on this. So at least a few different perspectives on it, spend the time. And then if you want to do this work and make it your purpose, go get trained, like a really legitimate training. You don't all of a sudden, like, I'm going to be a surgeon and just jump in and do it, right? Same with a therapist. The arrogance is like, I can see people like, well, I don't need to go they just assume they're good therapists. There's a lot of techniques. There's a lot of skills. The field's been unfolding for well over 100 years. But the main recommendation that I've heard a lot of people say, including a lot of the people I studied with, and highly agree, is go do your personal work first, right? So end of the day, when you're there sitting with a client, a lot of the techniques, a lot of the books, a lot of stuff goes out the window, and it's just you and them and your intuition of what you've worked through. So if you're going to guide somebody through a process, you've had to go through it many, many times, right? So keep doing your self-work with medicines, but in the right setting in a healthy space. This isn't like 4 journeys. It's like spend a few years. Like, you're not going to become a therapist without healing yourself or going through some big healing. It's that's where the medicine is gathered, by you doing your work and healing. That's what you get to bring to your clients. So spend a lot of time growing and healing yourself. Spend a few years doing this before serving the medicine.
Yeah. Awesome answer. Yeah. And it's one of those things,
just
like,
to share, we need more medicine holders.
Right.
I think the whole planet needs it. I just really want people to commit to it if you really want to do it.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point that I was driving at too, is like, when clients come to me and they're like, I had this peak experience and now I want to do this. It's like, hey, yeah, exactly. Like, take it seriously because you are going to have to do your own work. Like, it might seem like in that moment that you're like, oh, this is the easy way. Especially like I see this with breath work. As a breathwork facilitator, there's people that look at it and they're like, well, you're just breathing. How hard can that be? I've literally had people say like, wait, you get paid to help people to breathe? And I'm like, yeah, I do, and it's like, oh, well, I could do that. And it's like, you could do that. And you're not making your life easier necessarily by taking this path. In fact,
Mm.
you're really committing to your own work. You're committing to your own healing and your own self-actualization, so that you can hold space for others, right? Because you're not really doing the healing for them. You're just there supporting them and witnessing and holding the space. So,
No,
yeah, sorry.
no. Thank you. And if there's more I want to say, it's like you're becoming the container for that person and their
Right.
experiences, and you have to be able to hold it. We're talking about people's repressed traumas coming up. 1 in 4 people have sexual trauma. 1 in 6 men, that we know of. A lot of PTSD, war. So it's just like you're holding the deepest agonies and ecstasies.
Mm.
If you can't hold that for yourself, you're not going to hold it for somebody else, right? So it's really sensitive work. It's really intimate work. People are letting you into the most personal way they've ever been, ever. And so that requires a lot of refining. Like your container has to be big to hold all of this. You have to be settled. Like you need to feel really safe in the midst of all their emotions, and so therefore you have to feel safe in the midst of all your emotions.
Yeah, yeah, and um it's something that's a continuing process, right? For all of
Oh,
us.
forever.
Like
Never
it's
ends.
it's
Yeah.
it's not that I'm evolved or special or like that I don't have those feelings. It's just being able sometimes to witness them come up rather than um start to project them or get triggered by them, or you seeing the divine light in other people, as you're connected to that divinity within yourself, rather than seeing them for their traumas or their flaws, or the things that your unhealed wounds that you're projecting into the space as well.
I mean, I love that you said that it's, really kind of underlying that it's a forever ongoing process, including our personal work. So if you want your clients to continue deepening, you're going to have to keep deepening. It's the very process of growth and learning that we find so awesome. So keep taking trainings probably for the rest of your life. Keep doing your own therapy for the rest of your life, your own medicine work.
Yeah,
So and then you'll keep enriching your own practice in the process.
absolutely. Hmm. So beautiful. As far as that container that you mentioned, around psilocybin, it seems so much more common right now, at least in the United States, that we're seeing sort of this upsurge in the therapeutic setting, or obviously there's been a recreational setting kind of in the underground this whole time. Why do you think that we don't see the ceremonial setting as much with psilocybin as opposed to like maybe ayahuasca or peyote?
One, is the one, it's more accessible everywhere, right? People can grow it on their own themselves. And I think it was very strategically chosen for many reasons, including that it has less baggage and stigma. I've heard a lot of people that started these studies, and it's like, well, we couldn't have gone with LSD. It's easier to manufacture and we don't have to grow it widespread. But the stigma is too much because of the 60s to really start there. And MAPS was going back and forth between this and ended up also choosing MDMA because it's
Right.
amazing for PTSD. I think psilocybin is special on its own, really. I saw Earth and Fire, the creators of Euroid, they have the largest drug database on the planet. Even the FDA looks at their stuff, the DEA, to see what kind of new drawable drugs are out. And one of the talks, people asked him this question, I'm sure he's asked all the time, what's the substance that stands out for you the most? And these people, again, this couple knows more about substances than anybody on the planet. And his response is, well, psilocybin's really interesting and weird. I'm like, so wow, out of every compound, that's the one you chose, right? So I think it is a little special. And a lot of these other compounds, they only grow in very specific ecosystems, right? So that makes them harder to really replicate. And because they only grow in specific ecosystems that are very tied to certain cultures. And there's a deep sense of like those cultures need to be honored and we'd be taken away from them, given the psilocybin's everywhere. It's really all around for all of us. There's less of a like we're stealing from somebody. The Mazatecs, very grateful for them, kind of kept the fire of psilocybin alive. It seemed to have been used all through North, Central, and South America until the Europeans came, and then they were kind of ordered to extinguish them. It's the largest ethnocide in human history. 70 million people were here, 93% of the population died. And they survived for several reasons. They integrated Catholicism, right? There was a matriarchal culture, so a lot of the women held ceremonies. They were looking for men who were shamans. So aside from the culture being very, very remote, let's see why it was integrated most. Thus the baggage, and it's because it's coming through a therapeutic model that it's becoming integrated, right? Like that's the main way we kind of see our system of healing. So it has to move through our model for our society to really take it in. If it was coming through ceremonial religious models, there'd be a lot of backlash and uprising. Because it's coming through psychological and therapeutic clinics. It's coming through a language and form our culture can really integrate and understand.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. And then you mentioned the Mazatecs. I know that, from the intro that you studied with them. What was the most like sort of illuminating lesson that you got through your time working with the Mazatecs?
I studied for years with Francois Brzat and Harlan Brzat, Rosebard, and Francois wrote the book Conscious Medicine, and she'd been working with them directly for 25 years. Like they became like family. So I studied with a couple here, and they had the blessings to be a part of their lineage because they had been part of it so long. And then after a few year training, I went down with 12 people and her to spend 10 days over there with them. For them directly, and I don't know how this will come off to their people, it wasn't a whole lot other than the honor of participating in part of their culture and their tradition for the role they have played. Their background, just talking about cultural difference, because they're seeing one in Mazatec, but they're seeing generally Catholic hints. So it's a paradigm I'm no longer in resonance with. I think Western psychotherapy brings a lot to it, but we also need the process of integrating indigenous wisdom. So I've already done so much studies. I was in my doctoral program with conscious studies. I've done 15, 20 years of studying before I even got to them. And something that the general indigenous traditions have, including them, is a sense of what's known as animism. And animism is the perspective that everything is alive in its consciousness. And it was the primary main worldview for humanity for about 100,000 years. For most of human history, it was animism. When we take the psilocybin mushrooms and other psychedelics, it seems like the entire environment is breathing and talking to you, and just increases synchronicities. We see that with like the Native Americans, like the more kind of cliche, it's like, Father Sky and, Uncle Bird. And so it's like you have a deep relationship with all the parts in the environment. And that kind of heals our disconnected world, disenchanted worldview. All of a sudden, you're born into a world of magic, which seems radically strange and irrational to us. But when you move into a world where everything's deeply interconnected and communicating, and not in some schizophrenic way, which is all the times based out of fear, but like a deep open heart, life becomes like a fascinating adventure, and there's a deeper sense of trust in the universe, which deepens a sense of security, a safety, of wonder and awe, that you're having a personal relationship with existence. So I mean, that's something I think we can learn from all indigenous cultures, not just the Mazatecs, but I'm eternally grateful for the role they played. Without them, I think eventually we would have discovered the psilocybin mushrooms, but it might have been hundreds of years from now because we weren't even looking.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And thank you for sharing that. It reminded me of, sort of integrative times here in the desert, and where I know you've spent a lot of time, but just being out in sort of these, areas with hundreds, if not thousands of swarros, and just, just realizing that they're alive and that they have a spirit, and then that they're talking to us, if we can
Mm-hmm.
slow down and listen. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of wisdom there, in the desert,
Mm-hmm.
with all the different plants and animals here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also curious, like when somebody is interested in working with ayahuasca, for instance, there's a dieta, a diet to prepare that's kind of prescribed to them. And yet we don't quite have something similar at the moment, at least in the mainstream, with mushrooms. How would you recommend somebody prepare
Mm-hmm.
for a mushroom ceremony?
I guess what's more important than the specific things, I think, is just intent, to take it very seriously. I've heard a lot of people saying the ceremony really begins once you make the decision
Mm-hmm.
to take it. And so from that move forward, I see it as sacred and holy. And so to walk with that level of reverence is amazing. More specific than any intention is intentionality. It's more like a state of being. Uh, as far as adopting any specific protocols like the dietas, what I personally have seen in my work, and I'm not sure how this lands for most people, is a lot of them isn't necessary. Where the medicine's that potent, the state you come in, the openness, the willingness to surrender really, really matters. I mean, we're looking at clinical studies. It's like the effectiveness is really, really high. So if it helps people have some kind of ritual moving into it, and that helps your being kind of form into place, then that's amazing,
Mm.
But the medicines work strongly either way, So it's I don't know if we need it other than really paying attention to the classical set and setting. I've had to say maybe the most important element is who you're doing it with. I highly recommend working with a guide, a therapist, or a ceremonial leader, meaning somebody that's done a lot of training, taking this seriously, because they're bringing in the safety, they're taking care of the container, they're worrying about dosage. The hope is that you can go deeper with somebody else. If you're with somebody and you don't feel safe, you're going to close up and not go deep. You can't surrender, right? But hopefully this person's presence helps you feel safer so you can relax and go in even more. So hopefully I always recommend prep sessions going into it, spending an hour a week leading up to it for at least 2 weeks, intentional, like thinking about your life and what you're wanting to get out of this, reviewing your history and bringing everything up to the surface. And then at least 2 integration sessions, probably a week apart afterwards, at least spending an hour each week reviewing the experience and hopefully getting support from this person that you did this with to make the changes you need in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you talk more about that integration process? Like, what are some recommendations, or what are some ways that you work with your clients?
I mean, honestly, just so when I do it, the work over there is I take notes through the whole process. It's like a 6-hour journey, and reviewing the journey is generally really emotional and huge. For those of us that experience, it's hard to recall a lot of it. Sometimes people recall everything, right?
Uh-huh.
Sometimes people recall 10% of it. But when they hear back what they said, it all comes back. Right. I mean, for a lot of us, try to recall what you did a week ago on a very specific day. You're just going to hit a few things, if any, right? So, but if somebody walks you through that day, you'd be like, oh my God, oh yes, right? So same with this experience. It's like that world's too vast to really translate into our normal consciousness.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is helped by review. So I think that part's very, very important. And then in terms of actual processing in our mind and helping make sense of that, I think journaling is amazing. I know we were talking about before we got into somatics, like tensions and traumas and feelings are held in the body, right? They're actual energy holding patterns, right? Somebody's stressed all the time. They're like this, they're protecting their heart. They're over like this, right? And so getting body work is also really, really good and important to relieve a lot of the tension. I think exercise is one of my favorite spiritual practices by far. It gets in touch with your creativity and sense of power and letting go of like this self-observing ego all the time that can get in the way. Implementing what you were told. I mean, it's fairly often you get some level of homework in the psychedelic journeys of like, this is what needs to change in your life. These are the patterns that are hurting you. These are the patterns that will help you have these certain conversations with these people. Like there's certain patterns. if you're not carrying them out, why are you taking the medicine? I met somebody who'd been working for this for years. He went in and he got a certain download of what he needs to do, and he didn't do it. And he kept coming back 3 times, and the mushroom wasn't saying anything. And he realized, I didn't do the thing it told me. He went and did it, and he came back, and the mushroom worked and continued forward. Right? And so it's like, why are you going to see the teacher if you're not like following through and doing the homework? So, and then support could be really important. And I think something else that's really amazing, but can be hard for people, is forming community around this. So there's probably free online psychedelic integration groups every day of the week at this point. There's several here just in the Bay Area. And so building community, talking about experiences, connection goes really, really far on this.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. That, and I think that that's another area that somatic work is really important, because sometimes doing that homework is where we can come up against those sort of blocks in the body. Right. And so having a way to kind of connect in to what we're feeling and be able to move through it can be so integral as far as completing those homework assignments.
Well said. It's a line I've really liked. I can try to remember the exact teacher. It's like, when it comes to the mind, heart, and body, the mind can move really quick. You can learn ideas very fast. The ideas, insights are like a dime a dozen. It's not that big of a deal. It takes longer to change our feelings. You have to really think about stuff before our feelings suddenly change. Yeah. And the deepest and hardest to change are the patterns in our body, our physiological holding. But it's the most grounded, rooted. Once that change happens, it shifts the rest of the system, and it becomes more of a permanent change. Something so special about these medicines is that they work on a physiological level. So for a lot of those people, including working with high doses or in a therapeutic setting, it's very physiological. A lot of shaking, a lot of moving, a lot of throwing up. It's like a lot of these physiological patterns shift and move. And I love therapy, right? But I've heard it said, it's, with therapy, general talk therapy, it's like you come to understand your problems and where they came from, but they're still there. Because those energetic bodily blocks are still there. That's why or something like somatic psychotherapy, working directly with the body, goes much deeper. The body's so rooted with the unconscious. And so as these change, once the movements happen physiologically, there's more of a permanent response. And so I've heard a lot of people say they got more out of a one-day session than 20 years of psychotherapy, because talking only goes so deep. There's a lot more processes in our consciousness that go up from than just speaking, so.
Yeah. It's also why I think that integration, especially with somebody that's qualified and experienced, is so important. Because it's like, if you're taking that slow route of therapy, you have time to maybe make some of those adjustments. It might be a lot slower. You have that 10 years of therapy in one experience. It's like, you really need some help to kind of navigate that new terrain that you're in, right? Yeah.
It's the possibility is, when you say breaking through into a new paradigm, I mean a radical revolution of your worldview, of your values, of your identity, of what's going on. It's for some people it causes a crisis. Right. It's like a very positive shift, but some people don't know how to interact with their family or their partner now, right, or their work. You're like, oh my God, I've been feeling dead in my job for years. Oh my, I'm finally seeing this. And it can be a little hard. And like, what do I do? Do I leave now? Like, do I need help? Now they're worried and anxious. And so it can be destabilizing and disjolting.
Right.
There are changes that might need to be made. For example, there's always the deep hope that when people are in partnerships, they come and feel closer to their partners and their family. And I've seen a few people realize that they need to get a divorce. They were just too scared and had been there for years, right? Okay, yeah, it's definitely, I've seen 4 people work with that have to go through that, and you're like, wow, like that's big,
yeah.
And they finally get the courage because there's the clarity, and it's a very long process that, I hope they get a lot of support in.
Yeah.
Please tell me.
That particular Mount Lemon journey that I mentioned earlier, in addition to having this, conversation with the mushrooms, there was a big thing that came through about like, you need to forgive your dad. This isn't serving you, and like it's been going on for years, and you got to figure out how to like actually love him for who he is, not for who you wish he was, or like things like that. But it wasn't until I went back, and this only happened a couple of years ago, that I found a journal that I was using to write in the day after this journey, that I put the pieces together, because as I was reading what I had written, it was so clear to me. And I didn't have, it wasn't like in the journey, it wasn't like, you know, you need to get a divorce now. But there was, and especially in reading that reflection, this awareness that like, hey, this relationship has run its course, and it's time to stop hiding that, and like time to stop fighting that. It felt very peaceful at the time, but then when I went back and I'm reading this journal entry, and I looked at the date that I had written it, because this is a few years have passed, and it turns out that journey was a week before I actually left my wife. And this was, not like a flash in the pan. Like we had been married for almost, 12 years. So, definitely like a long-term thing. Right. And it really was time. And, and it's been something that I've worked through a lot of, like, yeah, there was a part of me that felt really stuck and felt afraid to leave, even though it was, a few years too late in terms of, when it should have happened. But yeah, it was a really amazing moment when I looked at the date and kind of put the math together of like, oh wow, like that was really helping me in a more profound, deeper way than even I was aware of at the time.
I hear that.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. I'm sure it was hard, but like everybody probably feels more free because of it.
Yeah, definitely. And at that point in my life, I was completely in the closet psychedelically, because she didn't wasn't supportive of that. And so it was like maybe a couple of times a year I would house sit for a friend, and I would have this opportunity to like have these macro experiences kind of in secret, which isn't really good for anybody, especially when you're thinking about integration and like what to do with those experiences. And yeah, so it definitely was best for everyone, and I wish her the best. Obviously, I hope it's the best for her, but yeah, no question, it was the right decision for me. Absolutely.
Glad to hear that. I'm glad you eventually move through it. It's definitely, I mean, any relationship is its own death. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the hardest experiences we had, and it's also the ability to gain a lot of strength and self-trust, following our own truth.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that mushrooms and have helped me with. When I first started doing this podcast, I was working in a corporate environment and was scared to death to talk about psychedelics and like have it be out there on the internet and like on my social media. And I was there was a part of me that was like convinced that I was gonna have a visit from HR like imminently about like, we need to talk about whatever you're doing on the weekends. So yeah, it's definitely been a process of, kind of coming into a more aligned version of myself. And I feel really grateful for the experiences that I've had, and the having the space and the time and the support of a partner. I mean, my partner now, and like she's an ayahuasca integration coach and therapist. So it's like to have a relationship with somebody that's more aligned with who I am and the work I want to do, and to be able to like share those experiences and support each other, and help each other integrate, and journey together is, an amazing experience. She was actually the one, she, this was, she said, I want to I want to have a mushroom ceremony. And I think you should lead it. And I was like, you do? Like what? Like, I've taken mushrooms a lot, but I've never thought about it in a ceremony before. And then, so the fact that she trusted me with that, and there were so many magical kind of synchronicities that experience unlocked, not only for me,
Mm.
but for us, and, our
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and, the things that have come out of it. It's just been such a blessing. So, you never know what's going to happen when you take that leap of faith.
There you go. Well done with the trust, and I love that you get to share these experiences. And I'm assuming just something that's so beautiful is that sense of shared purpose of what you're doing in the world. You really support each other and like bring your meaningful gifts to like the world and society.
Yeah, you're right. It does help it be a more integrative part of my life, because it's like we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly kind of in this environment of, you know, medicine work in whatever facet it is, whether it's, preparation and dieting, or, the actual ceremonies itself, or the integration process. And, it's like we both do breath work and do breath work together, and like, take ice baths together, like as preparation and integration. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, we're doing the somatic experiencing training together. And now she's like, hey, let's go do the holotropic breathwork facilitator training. And I'm like, okay, like, cool. Let's do it. So
Aw.
the fact that I get to, have somebody to share that with is really special, and very integrated.
Hugest congrats, man, for
Thank
sure.
you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the vital point, um the reason that the show is called The Vital Point is a couple of reasons. One is from a Buddhist teaching,
Mm.
that it's amazing, because here's this giant book that's a few hundred pages, right? And this whole book is a series of commentaries on the three statements that strike the vital point. So three statements that are about, basically the whole Buddhist path and the nature of mind. And when I started expanding the podcast, I thought, well, this is a really good metaphor for a podcast, because sometimes I can ask a question and we can talk about it for 2 minutes. Sometimes we can talk about the same question for like almost an hour, right? Um, but I also thought that there was something about integration in there, in terms of, regardless of the method of transformation that you're practicing, the vital point is
Mhm.
that you have to practice it.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so I'm curious if there's something that feels like a vital point, that's alive to you, whether it's through this conversation, or maybe something that's been coming up in your life or working with your clients. But what would your vital point be?
I like that. I was recently saying a few words for a group ceremony, and I wanted to like distill everything I had to say into also 3 points. Just like let's just make the effort. Let's try to get it down.
Yeah.
And so some preface is what I have seen, whether it's psychological development, work of Abraham Maslow or Ken Wilber that studied like 200 different models of psychological and spiritual development. It's that at the core of transformation is the change in identity. Who and what you think you are kind of influences everything. So as mentioned, depression is a distorted sense of view of identity. And as we move to whenever we say there's such things as higher levels of spiritual development, it's this change of how you see yourself, right?
Mm.
Um, and so that being the sense, I found three different sense of to focus on identity that kind of really, I think, speedline the whole process, right? The first is I am love. We're all needing love to heal or grow. Most traumas not getting enough or of love, or getting the wrong kind of love. It seems to be the substance for me, a person that creates the entire cosmos. When I think of God, it's like God's love with the voice. That everything is gone deeply is interconnected, unified is because it's made of love. That's literally what's inside and creates atoms in our very being. And so by saying I am love, we're kind of really touching into our deepest identity, more real than our name and our biography, right? It's this essence. It's what you are on, at the core level of what brings form, right? So that's the foundational one, I am love. Followed by that, I think a necessary ingredient to change and transformation is I am power. And what I found, and I learned all these from mushrooms, really. So, but it just resonates with all I've seen it in terms of psychological development. And so, power we can only hold responsibly to the degree that we hold love, right? And so, power without love is selfish and destructive. It is, right? But if we hold it with power, we can create the change we want to see in our personal lives in the world. Love without power doesn't lead to this global, large level of transformation that we need. And so much an increase of self-esteem and confidence, ability to follow through with the purpose comes to the ability we can hold, or we feel powerful and worthy, right? So love, power, and the third one is I am okay. And this one came from a mushroom experience when I was 22, or that statement came up, and when I saw it, like the ground, kind of all this light came out, and butterflies came all over the ground, and like started flying all around me. And I was like, is that really what I'm here to say? Is I'm okay? That's so simple. That's so not important. I'm like, everything get dark and dim. Then I walk a little bit more down this trail. So this was in Tucson too, and I'm like, I'm okay. And then all these butterflies would really kind of just like fly up, and I'm like, so I had a lot of time to sit with this one and see the huge importance of this little statement. If you feel like you're not okay, your nervous system becomes dysregulated because it thinks there's a problem. So you become kind of in hyper overdrive, right? You move into anxiety and you fear, and it's hard to enjoy anything because it thinks there's a problem to solve, right? So your mind becomes really, really active. But if you come to I am okay, all the safety mechanisms that get in the way finally relax, and there's a sense of contentment. And so you can keep this sense of I'm okayness in the midst of anything, in the midst of a crisis, in the midst of dying, you're okay. In the midst of somebody else dying or any kind of loss, you don't have to lose this okayness because it's a part of who you are and your reality. It's found, apparently the universe is okay with whatever's happening. You can be too, right? And so these little statements I see as like the fastest shortcut to everything I see as in terms of healing and development.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
So repeat them every day, right? We believe our identity because people told you who and what you are for so long, or thoughts in your head. And so the integration comes from trying to internalize this reality of your identity on a daily basis. And it's forever deepening.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I am love. I am power. I am okay. Awesome. So if you haven't already, definitely check out Jahan's book, The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, The Transformation of Consciousness and Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach. It's available wherever you buy books, especially Amazon and other places. We'll definitely put a link on the show page. But besides for the book, where would people go to connect with you?
It's website's psychedelicevolution.org. And you can find me first name, last name on Instagram and follow on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge and experience and those vital points as well. It's been a real pleasure.
It's always great spending time with you.
Awesome. And I hope you listening or watching this podcast really got to soak this in. There was so much good knowledge and, just points to chew on. I know I'm going to be really excited to go back and listen to this again as I edit it for everyone. So hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And remember, until we meet again, that the vital point is to practice. I sincerely hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. And if it struck a chord with you, please take a moment and leave a review for the show. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the learning journey going. And when you sign up, I'll send you a free guide for using breathwork for integration as a way to show my gratitude for your support. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and to practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'd be honored to accompany you on yours. So please don't hesitate to reach out, connect, share your journey, the successes and challenges alike. I'm just an email, DM, or review away. Thank you again for tuning in. Until our next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing because that is the vital point.